A question that causes people quite a lot of difficulty, and hence this very short recording is going to go through a way to tackle this in the exam, is the differences on profit depending whether or not using the average cost method or the first in, first out method. I think the way to deal with this is saying, right, there are two possibilities that come up in the exam. One is what's the effect during a period of rising prices, in other words inflation, and what's the effect during a period of falling prices. Now, we don't necessarily have falling prices or lower prices, lowering prices, falling prices. We don't necessarily have periods very often in the world economy where prices generally are falling, but you do within a particular industry. If you've got, say, for example, the oil industry, your inventory changes in value quite a lot, and your price is quite volatile, so it's really quite possible within an accounting period, even if the economy in general has got inflation, that within your particular industry the valuation of your inventory has fallen. Okay, well, let's take a look at the two things. We've got FIFO and average cost, AVCO, and you've got the possibility of rising prices and falling prices. So your first stage is basically in the exam to scribble this thing down here just in the note paper as this 2x2 matrix, and then identify the first of these, because it follows this rather nice pattern where no two answers are next to each other. Okay, I'll show what I mean by that in a second. Now let's take first in, first out first of all. In a period of rising prices, imagine that we've got a business which has a stable number of units, but the price per unit has gone up. So imagine you've got opening inventory. Let's say you've got 1,000 units at a unit valuation of $2. So opening inventory, which is an expense, is 2,000. We then have purchases during the period. So imagine we've made purchases of 100,000 units at a price of $2.50. Okay, well that's 250,000. Our closing inventory, well, imagine we still have 1,000 units, but inflation really has kind of bit in here, so that's therefore 4,000. Well, we can see the effect on cost of sales here. The effect on cost of sales is that closing inventory decreases cost of sales, in other words, increases profit. So because of the fact that closing inventory, that increases profit, is bigger than the opening inventory, which is an expense and reduces profit, therefore means overall, even if it's just the effect of inflation, this is going to give you a fairly low cost of sales figure. In other words, it's going to generate a fairly high profit. Cost of sales is an expense. The effect of inflation here, or increasing prices, because your year-end inventory, even if it's the same number of units, has got a greater value. That means that the closing inventory credit is greater than the opening inventory debit. There are a few ways you can look at this. Just pause the recording and go through that and convince yourself of it if you're not absolutely sure. But basically, the 4,000, which is a reduction in expense, is greater than the 2,000. Now imagine we had that the other way round. Imagine if you've got this scenario where you've got falling prices. Well, in that situation, you've got opening inventory. I'm just going to reverse the figures. Opening inventory would be 4,000. Purchases would be 250,000, and closing inventory is now 2,000. So what we've got here is the exact opposite way around, that the initial expense is greater than the closing inventory, which is reducing the expense. So therefore our profit there is going to be less. Now I would work through that one and convince yourself of this first scenario. That means during a period of rising prices, because the value of our closing inventory is going to be greater than the opening inventory, and therefore a net reduction in cost of sales, that's going to give us a higher profit. We've already seen that if we're using it the other way around, where you've got falling prices, FIFO is going to give you a lower profit. Well, FIFO gives you the most up-to-date valuation of your period inventory. So imagine if you're using average cost. If you're using average cost, then it's bound to be that this figure is a lower profit. Okay, and conversely, that's going to give you a higher profit. The reason for that is that basically average cost includes some element of the opening inventory, if you like, in the closing inventory. So just the way the thing works, it means that it's going to kind of flip around here. Okay, now I think the easiest one to convince yourself of is the first one here, which is FIFO in a period of rising prices gives you a higher profit figure. We're not asked to do this here, but if we ask what does last in first out do, it would flip the other way around. And that incidentally I think is probably one of the reasons why people in the States prefer to use LIFO, even though IS2 doesn't allow it, because it does tend to give you a fairly prudent measure of what profit is, because you generally speaking have rising prices. Okay, well, the most likely one I think is FIFO, basically saying the effect of inflation basically will be to give you a higher profit if you've got rising prices, and then note the fact that here, these two kind of things I mentioned, they don't sort of sit next to each other. Once you've got the first one, you can kind of fill in the rest of the table. I would recommend using that table rather than trying to convince yourself of this from first principles in the exam, because under the time pressure of an exam, it's possible to convince yourself that black is white and that a square is a circle. So it really is a good idea, I think, just to do this once, be convinced once, get that first of those four cells in this 2x2 matrix, convince yourself of that, just know that it's always the highest one first, fill in the rest of the table as the opposite, so no two are next to each other, and you're going to get the right answer every time.